Welcome to the QuotED podcast. My name is Sufyan Christian, and today I'm joined by Carl Millicent, and we will be, hi Carl, and we'll be discussing a quote from a book, Dumbing Us Down by the late John Taylor Gatto. And the first part of the book, or this bit that we're going to be covering in the next few weeks, talks about the lessons that are taught inadvertently to students across the world, which has been going on for many, many years. So I'm going to just quickly pull up the quote right now. And first of all, I want to say thanks to everybody for joining us today. And hopefully, you can get a lot of benefit. Please leave some comments in the at the bottom of the video, and everything is relevant. So without further ado, Carl, when you're ready, I'll just start.
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll have a chat about it afterwards.
Lovely. Okay, so to begin, I'm gonna just basically, this first part was done in about 1991 when John Taylor Gatto received a Teacher of the Year award for New York State. And so this is what he said. He said, "Call me Mr. Gatto, please. 26 years ago, having nothing better to do at the time, I tried my hand at school teaching. The license I hold certifies that I'm an instructor of the English language and English literature. But that isn't what I do at all. I don't teach English, I teach school. And I win awards doing it." So that, even in and of itself, and even just that part, I think we could even just do a whole podcast just on that part alone, because obviously there's the idea, that schooling and education are the same, but here, to sort of teach school is basically what he's being paid to do. And I think, a lot of teachers are paid to do the same as well. So it says here now, "You are at liberty, of course, to regard these lessons any way you like, but believe me when I say I intend no irony in this presentation. These are the things I teach. These are the things you pay me to teach. Make of them what you will." So the first lesson the first part is confusion. So he says, "A lady named Kathy wrote this to me from Dubois, Indiana, the other day. What?" And she's quoted as saying, "What big ideas are important to little kids? Well, the biggest idea, I think, is that what they are learning is not idiosyncratic, that there is some system to it, and it's not just raining down on them as they helplessly absorb. That's the task to understand, to make coherent." So Gatto clearly disagrees with this, and then he goes on to say, which is now where our part is going to start. He says, "The first lesson I teach is confusion. Everything I teach is out of context. I teach the unrelating of everything. I teach disconnections. I teach too much. The orbiting of planets, the law of large numbers, slavery, adjectives, architectural drawing, dance, gymnasium, choral singing, assemblies, surprise guests, fire drills, computer languages, parents' nights, staff development days, pull-out programs, guidance with strangers my students may never see again, standardized tests, age segregation, unlike anything seen in the outside world. What do any of these things have to do with each other? Even in the best schools, a close examination of curriculum and its sequence turns up a lack of coherence, full of contradictions." So I'm going to stop there, and I can obviously go on for much longer, but I think, Carl, I think you'd agree there's quite a lot to unpick through that. I think one of the things really that really reaches out is that he says everything he teaches is out of context, so there's no beginning and middle to it. It's like it just arrived. There's
that's right.
Like, well, this is why we're doing it, because there's a link to such and such. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing as well to point out here I think for some people it might be clear, but if people haven't read this before, if they're not familiar with Gatto and what he's trying to achieve here, it's important to point out that he's writing, I think, from the perspective of the stereotypical teacher, right? So when he says I teach, what he's saying is as a standard stereotypical teacher. And so the idea here is, you know, this is what's happening in classrooms across the country, across the world. And that idea, as you picked up at the start there on the lack of context, is well, I mean, it's good that this is the first episode of the podcast and that we're starting with this, because this is really the number one issue that I try to tackle when I'm working with teachers, is trying to incorporate context into the classroom, trying to apply learning to the real life scenarios that our students are going to face, because that lack of context is almost universal. It's a problem that I've seen, you know, here in Indonesia, where I'm based, in the UK, where I was a student, you know, where I studied and learned, and, you know, with the many people around the world that I speak with and that I work with through the Rebel Teacher Network and through some of my other projects, you know, the one thing we can all agree on, I think, is that there's a lack of context in the classroom. So it's a major problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't see that there's anything wrong with, you know, spending a good amount of time actually giving the context, so then at least, you know, the students can get a chance to actually feel attached to the subject, because for some of them they might be like, well, that's actually really quite interesting. I find that really, you know, I've got family that are connected to that thing, whatever the case may be. But if you just do like a brief sort of intro and okay, now we're going to do it, and now we're going to go really deep into it, you know, those that, you know, maybe might be on the fringes are those that invariably are going to be the ones that shut down. So again, it's about relevance. You know, if you're teaching you know, algebra for sort of 4 weeks or something like that, or 6 weeks or something, and then you stop, well, then why did you start? You know, right. But then if you're going to stop, whatever you're doing next has to connect to the thing that's gone before. Otherwise it's all disconnected, and then it doesn't make sense. And then that's where students can feel, well, I'm not really clever because I didn't understand it in the time. Where if you connected it to the previous one, and then they can see the thread, and then they may discover, and then they're like, okay, I see the link now. So now that may indeed even encourage them to go back over what they've done previously, and then, you know, begin to make those connections. So that thing of that confusion in some parts, I mean, would I be remiss to say that it's deliberately like that? Maybe, but there's a reason why it's been like this for so long. Because you know, it's quite easy to just say, well, we're going to just do such and such and such, and it's all going to connect. It's very easy to do that, but it's very easy to do the opposite and then to just continue with that. So I think you're right. I think as we move through some of the other parts of this this speech of Gatto's, I think the problem, or the matter of what's deliberate, will come up again, I think, with some of the other lessons later on. This one, in my experience, it's not necessary. I mean, it's deliberate because, you know, somebody sat down and wrote the curriculum, right? So I mean, the system was built this way. It wasn't an accident. But I think on this case, it's not deliberate in the sense that it's a purposeful confusion. I think it's just that this is, you know, you can almost forgive the people who, you know, initially designed the schools this way. They built the schools, they wrote the curriculum. You can forgive them for writing a curriculum that was compartmentalized this way, because it makes some sense to say, okay, we'll have an English lesson and we'll teach English, and we'll have a maths lesson and we'll teach maths. It seems sensible to think about that, and certainly people have been thinking that way for a couple of 100 years now. And, you know, most teachers don't question it. They teach a lifelong career in the schools, and they don't question it. So you can see why that would have arisen, and you can see why it would have held strong until now. But it does
crumble under not too much questioning. And as you know, I was talking about context at the what we might call the applied level, the real life level, right? So the context of why are we learning this subject and how does that relate to the real life context? And then later in the quote towards the end, which you've just picked up, is the more localized context of one lesson in relation to the other. So there's two levels there where this lack of context is causing trouble. And you know, you talked about, for example, algebra. So we start algebra with unit 1 and we spend a couple of weeks on algebra before we move on to something else that's unrelated. But it's also worth pointing out that within the course of a single day, if you have maths in your first period and then you move to English in your second period, there's no connection there either. You're studying algebra for 45, 90 minutes, however, and then you switch that off and you go to the next thing. And it's, again, you can see why this mistake or these mistakes are made. You know, if you're the maths teacher and you're teaching maths, you're teaching algebra, and then the bell rings and the kids go out, for that teacher, it feels like that kind of, self-contained time is finished. We covered the material, we did what we need to do. But for the student who at the bell, they have to jump up, run to the next classroom, get into the class, pick out their books, and be ready now to study English. They haven't had time to change their mindset from thinking about maths to thinking about English. And also, it doesn't give them any of the time they need to process what they just learned in the maths class.
That's right.
So I've seen lessons where something like physics, maths, chemistry, it's really dense. It's complex matter that's being discussed, and you can feel. And as an observer, I'm sitting at the back of the lesson. I'll be honest. I'm in my 30s now. It's well over a decade, almost 2 decades since I was learning some of these lessons myself, right? So I'm in the back of a class, watching students study a subject, and I'm confused because it's a long time since I learned it, and I've never needed it since. It's so it's stuff I've forgotten about. I'm sat there confused, thinking, well, if I'm confused, the kids, now granted, some of them are, when it comes to maths or physics, perhaps some of them are smarter than I am. But nevertheless, if I'm sitting at the back, supposedly I've graduated from school, I've been through all that, and I'm confused, you can feel the looks on their faces, and they're kind of, they're whispering to each other. There's just a tension in the room that tells you how confused they are. And then, the bell rings and they run out of the class. And as I excuse myself, I walk out of the class, and I can see them all kind of getting their books out for the next thing, thinking, okay, they were confused, and then it ended. They haven't had the time to sit with it and think, okay, I'm confused about this. Let's process it. Let's think about, no, on to the next thing. And the next thing is completely unrelated, completely disconnected. And in many cases, they won't revisit that thing until the exam at the end of the year. Right, it'll be 6 months will go by, and then they have to sit down in a silent room and try to remember everything that they can from that lesson that they didn't really understand in the first place. And so, like you say, of course, they're going to feel stupid because they didn't have time to learn it in the first place. They don't have time to think about it afterwards. It's not related to anything else that they're studying. And then they have to take a test to see how clever they are. It's all it's built for their failure,
But then the thing is what Gatto even says, a bit further on from this first part, is that now children are basically conditioned to accept confusion as their fate.
Yeah.
So if they don't know something, it's just like, well, okay, that's all right, And then the other part that he then talks about the age segregation. I mean, as I've been in schools. I'm a parent. I've dropped my kids off to school and everything else. And it wasn't really until I actually did get the book. Sorry to forget, the book's actually called Dumbing Us Down.
Yes, right.
From the book Dumbing Us Down. So it wasn't actually until I read that book, and then I thought to myself, yeah, because year ones are with year ones, and year fives are with year fives, and year sevens, and nobody fraternizes with each other.
Right.
Wherein, the second you step out of school and you go to like your local college or something like that, you do a certain course, you're going to be sitting with people that are like twice your age.
Yeah.
You're going to be sitting with people that are in there. You're going to see people who are coming from work and You know, you're there clowning around at the back of the class, and they're looking and they're thinking, I haven't got time for this because I've just come from. So you're just like, whoa, I haven't had to deal with that. So then it's like, really, unfortunately, school doesn't do that preparation part of, well, okay, and I get it in the sense of, you know, some children might be more, they may have been, maybe some of the older children had been exposed to certain things that are not really appropriate for younger minds to be around. But the other side, if we're just talking about an experience in the classroom, in that environment, just as a linear experience, a younger person can teach me something that I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Or help me understand something that I don't like, and I can accept it. Like my kids, if I ask them about algebra, they'll be like, yeah, do this and do that, and present, do this, do that, and I'll be like, whoa, I didn't get that. And then they're gonna ask me about stuff that I know a lot more. So that age segregation doesn't happen anywhere.
Yeah.
Like,
And, you
when
know,
you go
like you
to
said,
work, you know.
that's it, exactly. When they step out of school and they go to work, they, you know, you have to, and you'll remember this as well as I remember this from when we left school and moved into our first workplaces. You have to very quickly realize, okay, we're not in school anymore, right? Very quickly realize all these people who are older than me, they've been in this company for longer than me. Either I can sit here and just be insignificant and achieve nothing, essentially, and end up at the bottom of the pile, or you know, fortunately, in fact, there's a couple of things connecting here. I mean, you talked about the segregation in school and how you don't get to fraternize with anybody from the other years. It was particularly challenging for me because outside of school, most of the people I hung around with were 2, 3, 4 years older than me. So when I was out at the weekends and I was out in the evenings, I was not often with the kids from my year group. I was with the older kids. So that meant when I was in school, I found it harder to connect with the people in my year group because they weren't my friends outside of school. You know, obviously some of them were, but I was outside of school. I was socializing with a much broader age range. Now that set me up well, fortunately, that when I did graduate from school and moved into work, I was better set up, but not because of school, but because of, you know, my own environment, my outside of school environment. For, you know, for anybody who's not got any exposure to what it's like to spend time in a diverse age environment, and let's face it, diverse cultural environment. For most schools, you're quite you know, fixed in a non-diverse environment a lot of the time. To then enter into the adult world of work, it takes a big step up to then just have the confidence and the self-assuredness to be able to insert yourself into an environment where everybody is older than you and more experienced than you, and feel like you have something to contribute.
Yeah, well, see, because also, you know, I know they still do it now. I don't know if they do it in Indonesia, but I know the kids still do work experience here.
Yeah.
So on one side, that's really good, but on the other side, it's like they only did it for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So like my son did work experience for 2 weeks. He went to Costa Coffee.
Yeah.
So our local Costa, you know, they were, you know, we're there like regularly. So they were like, yeah, fine, let him come down. He really liked it because he got that taste of, okay, got to get up, got to go work, come back, now you're tired. And so he got that little taste. But the other side of it is like, well, what about if he did it for 6 weeks?
Exactly. Or a year, you know?
You know, like, what would his experience be then? You know, like, what would his maturity level be? What would his confidence level be like? Because after 2 weeks, you know, you could see after the first 2 or 3 days, you could see that, you know, he had a little bit more swagger about him. And, you know, he's around adults now that are not his parents, not his family. And he has to be able to, like he said, he has to be able to prove himself. He has to show, like, I should be here. Like, I can manage, you know, I can do this. So imagine if they were there for 6 weeks, 12 weeks.
Yeah.
You know,
even that's
it'll
hit
be
and miss.
an exponential growth.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even that's hit and miss. When I did my work experience back in obviously in the UK, the 2 weeks, I did 2 different placements, so 1 week in each. And, you know, the person I was placed with, obviously, you know, I was in a particular institution, but I had one person who was there to kind of mentor me. And at that time, I was interested in law at the time, so I spent 1 week with a solicitor in her kind of private practice, and then another week in the Crown Courts with a sort of, you know, a paralegal assistant. And the solicitor was fantastic because I was, you know, it was her office, it was her private practice. I was shadowing her, and she was, you know, it was a really valuable learning experience. The other week when I was in the Crown Courts, which had the potential of being obviously a fantastic experience, most of the day was spent just kind of following this girl around who was my, you know, appointed person, while she made cups of tea and ate biscuits and watched TV and, you know, didn't do much, which granted is an authentic working experience, but I didn't learn a lot from it. And that's not even really to say anything about her. She wasn't an educator. She wasn't, you know, she didn't sign up. She didn't take that job so that she could have some spotty little 16-year-old follow her around all day, right? So, I mean, she's not really primed for it either. So the concept of work experience is a really valuable one, but in implementation, as you say, it's far too short for it to have any real impact, and it's a hit and miss process anyway, because you know, where and whom you're placed with has a big impact on how valuable that time's going to be.
It does, you know. But you know, even back to, so I'm just getting the computer on here. So back to this quote here. So when it talks about, you know, everything I teach is out of context. I teach the unrelating of everything. I teach disconnections. So, you know, again, it's just about what we were saying before. So, and then it talks about all these things. So, orbiting the planets, law of large numbers, slavery, adjectives, architectural drawing, dancing news. So the thing is, and it comes up in even one of the other lessons, is that for each one of those subjects, you have to be 100% focused and interested in every single one of them subjects. You might genuinely be like, this is rubbish. Like, this is boring. Or we've covered something like this already in year 4. Why are we still doing it in year 5? So the teacher then is forced to make it relevant outside of saying, you've just got to do it anyway. So they've got to be creative in their thoughts, in their language choices to make it, you know, to get couple on board. Invariably, you're going to find sort of 2 or 3 or more, you know, that really do want to learn about Shakespeare. But then you're going to have others just thinking like no, and then they just end up disrupting the class or colouring at the back or whatever the case may be. But it's that thing of making everything important, because there's just too much. It's like you said, you know, if you're doing something for an hour and you really like it, then when you're ready to stop, you'll stop. You might stop about 5 minutes, go get a drink, and come back to it because you really want to do it, because it interests you, it's relevant to you. But then if you're like, no, you have to stop doing that now, and now you've got to go over there, and you've got to do that, you've got to do chemistry, and you've got to be 100% focused on that, regardless of whether you like it or not. I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be like that.
That's right. And I think it's worth pointing out again from the teacher's perspective why this can happen. If you are, you know, you mentioned Shakespeare there. So if you are the English lit teacher and you've got the students in your classroom for an hour, well, of course, that's your focus, right? That's your sole priority is I've got to teach Shakespeare for an hour. And that's, you talk about being disconnected for the students, but the disconnection on the level of the teacher is important as well, right? The teacher is, you know, my job is to teach Shakespeare for this hour. And I'm also, as the teacher, I'm just as disconnected from everything else that's going on in the school. So for me, you know, when I look out at a room of 20, 30 students in my classroom, you know, my goal is for them all to excel at English literature, because all I'm aware of is what's happening now in this hour. If I knew, and some, obviously, you know, some teachers communicate with the other teachers in their building and they get to know the holistic environment that the students are experiencing. But, you know, a lot don't. And so if I don't know my students' whole story, then all I care about is Shakespeare. But if I do know, okay, this kid who's really not performing well in my class, but I know, because I know this kid and I know what's going on in the building, I know he is excellent at maths and physics, right? Two subjects that are closely connected to each other, but completely different from literature, right? I would be perhaps less concerned with his lack of interest in Shakespeare because I know he excels somewhere else. And, you know, not only do we all have strengths and weaknesses, and that's a thing that we should not vilify, but accept. We also, it's just unreasonable to think that, you know, I mean, look around at your social circle, look around at the people you know. It's very rare that you'll find somebody who loves reading Shakespeare or loves, you know, let's say they love musical theater and they love physics and they love cricket, you know, and they're equally interested in these three things as well as everything else. These three things don't tend to coincide, and certainly not in everybody. It's, you know, the person who loves playing rugby is not likely to be the same person who loves dancing ballet in the dance studio. Now, it could be the case, but if it's not, we shouldn't be surprised, and we shouldn't be putting pressure on saying, you know, often the students will get punished and they'll say, look, if you're not going to work harder in this class, then we're not going to let you play rugby. You know, you have to make sure you get your A's here, otherwise we're going to take you off the team. You go, hold on a second. You're punishing him for his excellence in one area. It doesn't make any sense.
So you know, just going back to that, this, you know, the whole point of, you know, of like the confusion in the classroom, and then obviously like you were saying about in the school, so everything's sort of disconnected on there. What would you say could be a solution to that? Would it be to just sort of strip down the curriculum and just make it super linear, where you've got sort of 4 or 5 subjects at the max that are being delivered, or can you still continue in the way that it is now and then sort of still not have that confusion there?
Yeah, I think this is, as far as implementing change goes, this is one of the more challenging areas, and the kind of change that it needs is one of the more radical kinds of change that I tend to talk about. I think the two kind of biggest barriers in the type of change that I want to see, the two biggest barriers are the subject-based curriculum that we're talking about now, and the other one is exams, right? Which we'll talk about obviously in a future podcast, I'm sure. These are the two things that seem to be hardest to change. As for this problem of subjects and the linear curriculum, first of all, I think too much is covered. That's one of the things that Gatto says in the quote that you've read today. He says, I teach too much. That is, I think, true. But also that linear model, the two things that don't need to be the case are the linearity and the subject division. And this is the more radical thing, I think. So on the front of the linearity, what I would like to see is more of an opportunity for the students to look at a topic, ask their own questions about that subject, about that fact, about that detail. And then because they all have different questions, they'll end up studying slightly different things in slightly different ways, still in the context of, you know, it could be, I don't know, space travel, whatever it is, right? Still in the context of space travel, but different students are focusing on different aspects of it. They're asking different questions and therefore finding different answers, which they might then, you know, share with one another and correlate later, or they might not. But that non-linear approach where students can go in different directions would be part one. And then part two would be when they go in those different directions, it's entirely likely that, you know, studying about space travel, as the random example I'm using, you know, you might think of that as like physics, right? That's a physics subject. But one kid who starts asking questions about that might end up reading science fiction, and now we're in English literature. And another kid might start looking at, you know, fuel consumption, and now perhaps we're in chemistry and mathematics. And you know,
Yeah.
another kid might think about the possibility of life on another planet if you travel, and now we're in biology. And the
Mm,
idea that you can only study one subject at a time, or you're fixed in this box of one subject, is the other thing that I'd like to see disappear. So I think
yeah.
it should be less linear, and it should be less confined to subjects. But those 2 points, of all of the change that I like to talk about and all of the work that I like to do, those are the most radical concepts, I think, about education reform.
Because you know, sort of going just quickly before we go back to the quote, you know, what you said there. I mean, what I would ideally like to do, and we talked about it like a little bit, you know, is to set up these education centers where, you know, you've got like maths, English, and computer programming, and it's like, you know, students that are, you know, excited about any one of those three come there, and then they'll be studying that for sort of 4 to 6 hours a day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So, you know, if you, and this is not like, oh, you know, you have to do, you know, this. And so it's like, well, if you're a person that really does like to do numbers, if that's your thing,
yeah,
you've got, you know, sort of from lunchtime until home time, 5 days a week to just do that. And
yeah,
then when you're ready to study the more, you know, technical things, then you go and study that at your pace, you know. And obviously you're going to have a facilitator there that
yeah,
is there to sort of answer the questions, and you've got the platform where all the information comes from. But the fact that we're in this information age, even like I said to my kids, I'm like, why you guys, how comes you don't know these answers? Like, it's there. And
yeah,
you had that Stone Age, Middle Age, whatever it is, Ice Age. We're in the industrial age. We're in the information age now, where, you know, for example, like I'm talking to you on a mobile phone device.
yeah,
Like, you know, when I was in school in
yeah.
the 80s.
We'd have been writing letters to each other.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
I'd
So
have been
it's like,
waiting
you
a
know,
week
like,
to hear your response.
yeah, and it was accepted. You know, you had a pen, but you know, you
Yeah,
completely like excited about it. You just completely
yeah,
gassed.
yeah, yeah.
You know, we had an RM Nimbus. You know, we had
Right.
like a Spectrum and Commodore 64, and those were the things. You know, Atari was like, it
Yeah,
was like PlayStation now.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm
yeah, yeah,
saying to these guys, I'm like, you know, and I love my video games. So I'm like, look, the games you guys are playing now are what we wished the games looks like and behaved like
beyond,
back
right? I
then.
mean, beyond, right?
You
Because
know,
can't even imagine the
you
level
can't.
that we're
No,
at now, right?
you can't.
Yeah,
So I'm like, okay, so the information that you want
yeah,
is not in. It's not in the school anymore. I mean,
yeah,
it's not only in the school anymore. It's like
yeah,
school has their information, but you can go on Google, you can go on YouTube, you can go on LinkedIn, you can go on Twitter, you can go almost anywhere.
yeah,
You know, is it Quora? You can go in
yeah,
there
Cora,
and
yeah,
ask a
yeah, yeah,
question, and someone will have the answer for you. So
yeah.
the information is there.
Yeah. But you know what? I think coming back to the quote, I mean, this idea of the disconnectedness and the confusion, and as I've said, you know, some of the experiences that I've seen as an observer, and to be honest, that I had as a student when I was in school, where, you know, come the end of the lesson, the students feel confused, they feel demotivated, and the last thing they want to do when the bell rings and they leave, they've got a headache, they're clouded, fuzzy, because they don't understand what the teacher's just been kind of droning on at them for the last however long. The last
Yeah,
thing they are then inspired to do is jump on Quora and start asking questions about the subject, which
yeah,
should be,
yeah.
you know,
Should be
ideally,
what it. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Ideally, we should have students leaving the classroom with a small amount of knowledge that they understand well,
Uh-huh.
but the inspiration to go out and learn more. But what we
More.
actually leave them with is a massive information that they do not understand. They don't know
Uh-huh.
why they learned it, and they couldn't care less about trying to
Yeah,
learn
yeah,
more
yeah,
on their
yeah.
own time. So what we're
No.
giving them, you know, I would like to give them less in the
Uh-huh.
hopes that they would learn much more. As it is now,
Yeah.
we give them too much, and they don't actually understand half of it anyway.
Yeah. Well, the thing is when you say that about, you know, doing stuff at home, that's another one of the lessons. I think it's lesson 4 or 5, or is it 7? That Gatto talks about. You know, it's called like one can't hide. wherein,
Yeah,
you know, the
yeah, yeah,
school is basically following you home,
yeah,
asking you to
yeah,
do it's homework. It's like, well, for example, like when you finish work or when I finish work, you know, I really do like doing what I'm doing, but
exactly
when I
right. Yeah.
leave there, I don't want anything to do with it. So
Hmm.
I, I don't respond to emails. I don't even read
Right.
the email. I'm like, I haven't got anything to do with it. I'm at
Yeah,
home.
yeah,
I'm with my wife. I'm with my kids. I'm with my cat. I'm playing my games. I'm watching telly. I'm watching football.
yeah,
I'm doing. I'm doing. So why do we have to then do that with younger minds when
yeah.
again it doesn't happen in the outside world? Because
That's it.
obviously there are lots of people, granted that's a little bit of a bad statement, but there are lots of people that do bring work home because they have
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
but
Well, look, I'll be
there
honest as
are,
well. I mean, I'll go. I'll be the kind of counterpart to you here because I do tend to bring my work home, as it were. I mean, for starters, I do most of my work from home anyway, and so for me,
mhm,
the kind of the boundaries of work time and free time are blurred anyway.
yeah,
Um, but I work on my own time, so I can take a break whenever I want. You know, I have deadlines. As long as I meet the deadlines, I kind of work whenever I want to work. But you know, incorporated into my work is a lot of writing and a lot of reading. I have to do those in order to do my work, and I enjoy doing that. And you know, I'm not an advocate for homework. I think homework
mhm,
should be perhaps close to abolished, maybe abolished,
yeah,
but certainly should be heavily ratcheted down. But
mm,
you know, I still advocate for students leaving school and learning more if they want to,
mhm,
right? If they're
yeah,
inspired to.
yeah, yeah,
And we should be having them going home where they can't wait to get on the laptop when they get home and look for a YouTube video about the thing that they just learned, or find a blog, or as you said, you know, Quora and forums where they can go and learn what they want, the way they want, for as long
mm,
as they want. When they get bored, they turn it off. But if they're inspired, they'll keep learning. It's not homework, but
no,
it's just it's ongoing learning, where at the
yeah, yeah,
moment we send them home with homework that they don't want to do. They feel like they
mm,
have to do it. They don't care
yeah,
about it. They can't
mhm,
wait to skip it or find an excuse not to do it. That's
mhm,
the opposite of what the goal should be, where they want to
yeah.
learn, they're keen to learn, right?
Well, the thing is like if you ask them, for example, you know, what's your favorite thing to do, and if it's like, oh, you know, I don't know, doing like graffiti or something like
Yeah,
that, and
yeah,
they say, okay, cool. You know what? Can you find out about some the
right,
history of it, or like
yeah,
where the most popular stuff is, or wherever it is, next
yeah,
day, or in a, they're gonna come with something,
yeah. And
and they're gonna feel like, and
that brings
then
us
that's not gonna
straight back
feel like, yeah,
that brings us straight back to the point about context, right? That
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the applied level of context, the one that I was first thinking about. Um, the graffiti for a lot of our students, you know, and graffiti is, as one example you brought up, but I think it's a perfect example where, you know, most of the stuff that you learn in an art lesson, I
Mhm.
don't see it around me, right? But graffiti,
No, no,
well,
no,
when
yeah,
I'm on the bus, excuse me, if I take the bus to school, then I'm seeing it on the way to school and on the way home.
yeah.
I'm literally surrounded by graffiti. It's in my environment, it's contextual.
Mm.
And excuse me, sorry. It's something that the students might be interested in because they see it. And, you know, you can pick up, the only one that comes to my mind is Banksy, which is a bit mainstream now. But, you know,
Yeah,
you can pick up something
yeah.
like Banksy, which is really interesting. I mean, you know, what an interesting character. Kids don't want to read about Monet because the teacher told them they have to. But if
Mhm.
they, you know, learn about Banksy, that's really interesting. And then, you know, that will be, for some students, that will be a pathway into wanting to learn more about fine art and, you know, the history of art because
Yeah.
they want to. But, you know, when you have a kid who's into graffiti and then the art teacher tells them, no, 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 we're studying Picasso. They go, I don't care about
Mhm.
Picasso. No, no, no,
Don't
you've
care
got to
about
study
Picasso.
this. And then
Mhm.
now, you know, you shut them down because you've told them they have to study the thing they don't care about. They're not
Mhm.
allowed to look at the thing they do care about.
Mhm.
And you've taken their life, right? The graffiti that's around them in their world, the
Yeah,
life
yeah, yeah, yeah.
context, the application that they have in their environment, you shut
Mhm.
that down and said, no, 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 we've got to learn from the textbook. So you've removed all context and you've put them in a book.
Well, the thing is, that's the system, isn't it? That's the thing, and you can't really, you can't subvert the system as is.
Right.
You just have to have, like I think I put on LinkedIn, you have to have just a plethora of alternatives, but
Yeah.
quality alternatives. It's not just an alternative, oh, we're doing things different. No, like philosophy wise, you know, like it's an actual healthy alternative, because the point comes where when you say to a child, okay, you know, what do you want to do when you grow up? You know, like Michelle Obama said, you know, like growing up is a destination. So when
Yeah.
you're
Right.
growing up, then that's it. It's like, well,
Yeah.
what do you want to do, you know, tomorrow? What do you want to do next week?
Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
of them be like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Some of
Yeah.
them might
Exactly
be like,
right.
I just want to play football all day, or
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to paint all day, or I just want to cook all day, I want to read all day. So
Yeah.
those children that want to read all day and can read all day, want to cook all day and can do that,
Exactly
if
right.
we
Yeah.
give them the opportunity to do that, within 2 or 3 years, they'll be at a level that many
Gordon
adults
Ramsay. Right. Exactly
can't
right.
even
Bang
get
on.
to.
Yeah. And also,
So,
by the way, let's be honest now. You know, you and me right now here. Let's be honest and say that we're actually, you know, when I say we, the system, we're lying to the kids anyway when we talk about, or we ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because I don't know how many people you know, but I don't know many people who, from the age of, you know, say 20, you know, they left school, they're 18, 20, for the rest of their life, until they died, they just did one thing. I don't know many
yeah,
people that's
no.
true for. Yes, some, sure, one or two maybe, but that's not the fixed model anymore. Maybe it
Yeah.
used to be. And my, you know, I can, of the people that I do know, it's people like my granddad, right? My granddad would have had a fixed single career, probably worked for one or two employers for his whole life. That's not really what
Yeah.
people do anymore. And yet we still talk to kids like they need to make the decision. They need to know before they graduate from school, by the time they're 16 or 18, they need to know what they're going to do for the rest of their life. But the truth
Yeah.
is that, you know, that's not true. That's a lie that we're telling them, because the truth is nobody does that anymore, you know?
Well, the thing is like, you know, and even I sort of frowned on it, I think a couple of years ago. And it's like, well, what do you, I said, well, what do you want to do? And they're like, oh, I want to be a YouTuber. It's like, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
but then it was like a thing where like, these guys are making money. Do you know what I mean? Like these
Oh,
guys
gee,
are
yeah.
getting
Yeah.
paid. So
Yeah.
it's like they're looking and thinking, well, this person is just sitting in front of a camera and they're just talking about their video game. They're playing their game and they're talking about it. They're making people laugh. They're
Yeah.
talking about a
Yeah.
couple other things, or someone's doing makeup, someone's unboxing stuff. One guy and his
Right.
son are
Right.
cutting stuff in half and looking inside. It's like these are
Yeah.
YouTubers. Like this is a viable option. Like
Yeah.
these people are millionaires.
Yeah.
So why would a young person not look to try and do
Right.
that?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they see it as a viable option. So this
And
whole
it's
thing of
also, it's also, just to cut in, because it's also something again that's in their environment, right? In a way that it wasn't, you know, it was just kind of coming in for me. So I'm very familiar with YouTube and that now, but I wasn't, you know, sort of when I was at school or in, you know, it wasn't really a part of my life. But for kids now who are in school now, YouTube is just, that's a large part of their environment, right? So they're watching it as they grow up. Why wouldn't they then transition into making it, you know, being on the other side of it when they grow up and they start getting their own ideas? Why wouldn't they do that? It's only the same as, you know, when we were at school, somebody who, you know, they might have loved football and they're watching football all the time and they've got their favorite footballer or they've got their favorite team, and you know, a good number of them, it was natural that they would transition as they grew up. They'd be playing at the weekends and in the evenings, and they would transition by the time they graduate, they'd be scouted and picked up and they'd become the football players. It's natural progression that some of them are going to graduate into that world. It seems like the same should be true now for the, you know, the YouTubers. If you've got kids who are watching YouTube as they grow up, some of them will want to grow up and be on the other side of that.
Well, that's the thing, you know, going back to what Gatto was saying about, you know, things being in context and things being
exactly
like deliberately disconnected.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if you connect things, then that child understands, well, I'm in this place, this building with all these other people, and things are making sense, you know, like I know why I'm doing that, I know why I'm going there. And then maybe it might make it easier for them to understand where they might want to go, what they might want to do. But there are some kids that are dead on what they would like. They know.
Yeah, that is so true. Yeah.
They know exactly what they want to do. They've thought about it. They've done some research. They're like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
This is how I get there, and it's like, okay. So what we have to do now is to help facilitate that. Us as adults, educators, parents, so we have to help facilitate that. We don't have to keep putting stuff in the way. Like, well, no, you know, you have to learn, German, but I don't intend to live in Germany.
Yeah, never going
Like,
to speak German, you know.
it's not my thing. Yeah, but there's only Spanish and German.
Yeah.
I don't like any of those languages, and what I want to do doesn't involve me speaking any of those languages.
Yeah.
But you have to do. And then it's like, if they choose not to pick it, then it's a problem. So then why don't we just say, okay, well, look, we know the level that you need to get to.
Yeah.
The resources we may not be able to provide, but there's apps out there. There's like, I'm learning French at the minute, so there's like Duolingo, there's Babbel, there's Rosetta Stone. There's loads of stuff out there that you can use to use the language. So it doesn't have to just be, you know, in that building there, in that institute.
And of course,
and this is
the resources is a, you know, it's a hurdle to overcome, and there are ways to overcome it. But also, the student, if they're motivated, they will do half of the work of overcoming those barriers because they want to, right? So if you say to somebody, you know, I want you to learn this thing that you don't care about, but we don't really have the resources for it, then no one's ever going to learn anything, right? But if the kid says to the school, I want to learn this thing, the school says, sorry, we don't have the resources for it, and the kid says, well, I do, I can find them. And kids will go the extra mile because it's something they care about. They're not going to do any work for something they don't care about.
No, but the thing is, that's the autonomy. You see, that's the autonomy. That is the self-directed learning. That's the whole thing that I'm about, which is open source learning. You know, you can step out on the street almost anywhere. You can find someone who is, you know, like, for example, like mechanics. You know, maybe there's a guy at the end of your street. He's always underneath his car.
Yeah, right.
Or he's always got some cars. He's always doing something. So instead of just sitting in the classroom or watching a video, just go and talk to my guy about it, because he's going to have the information. He might even be able to show you how to change the oil.
Yeah.
So that's that learning there where, you know, obviously the powers that be, you know, allowing the children to sort of go and experience it. And I'm not saying that it's a rose-tinted world and everything else. There are lots of bad stuff that happens out there.
Sure.
And, you know, you get all your safeguarding. You can do all that, which is important. But children are not going to remain children.
Right.
And we can't keep trying to keep them as children. And then when they get to 18, they're like, well, you're 18 now. You should know that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
like,
exactly
well,
right. You never told me. No one taught me.
No, you didn't tell me about that. You know what I mean? So that's the thing.
No,
so
exactly right.
We round up. I'm going to just have another quick look back at this. I just got to look back at my laptop.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't get to actually print it out. So it says, so Gatto was saying, even in the best schools, a close examination of curriculum and its sequences turns up a lack of coherence, full of internal contradictions. Fortunately, children have no words to define the panic and anger they feel, like constant violations of natural order and sequences fobbed off on them as quality in education.
Yeah. I think there's something there.
I mean, that's even a bigger one than maybe the first part.
Yeah, I mean, what I think that rounds up quite nicely some of the things we've mentioned already. I mean, again, thinking of some of the observations that I've done, especially, you know, come to the end of a lesson, and the students have sat there and kind of nodded and taken their notes throughout the lesson. Not really raised their hands, not really asked questions. The lesson comes to a close, and then I'll, you know, sometimes the way the lesson's gone, I'll confront the teacher and say, you know, it seemed to me that this didn't make sense. And then they'll look at it and we'll have a chat and we'll realize that there was a contradiction in what they taught. There was something wrong in what they taught. They taught it incorrectly, or, you know, it didn't really make sense the way they explained it. There was a problem in what they taught, but the students sat there throughout the whole lesson. They didn't say, I'm confused, because I think sometimes they're so confused, it's so far beyond them that they can't see, they can't even see where it doesn't make sense. It's just a
Yeah.
cloud. It's just a fog that they're sitting in. They're writing down as much as they can. They don't really understand the notes that they're writing. They're just writing it down anyway. If you actually ask the student at the end of the lesson, can you explain your notes to me? They're baffled by what they've written on their book.
Yeah.
But, you know, so the level of confusion is so far or so high that they don't even know what they're confused about. It's just a fog of confusion. And that means they don't confront the teacher and it never gets rectified.
No, because they accept it,
Yeah,
because they're like, oh, this is your education. And then, you know, I always contend that, you know, that education and schooling are not even
exactly
close.
right. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, because like what you were saying about when children are interested in stuff, they'll leave the school and then they'll go at home and go on Google and go and find stuff out. That's the education. Like the
Yeah.
first part of that does start in the classroom, where you're introduced to,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
an idea or a method or a subject.
Yeah.
And then if that kid's really ignited by that, you know, if they've got a little bit about them, then they'll go out and they'll go and find out
Yeah.
about it. Or if support is such at home, mum or dad will say, well, you know, what happened at school today? Oh, what do you think about that? Is it
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's
Exactly
not.
right.
Okay, cool. Let's move on.
Yeah.
If it
Yeah.
is, then it's like, all right, do you want to find out
What
some
can we
more?
find out? Yeah, exactly right.
What can we find out? You know,
Yeah.
and then they go back and, oh, I've got this, I've got that, I've got that. But if everything is deliberately disconnected, then there's no need for you to really come in. You'd be like, oh, that's really nice. And then you just move on because you have to. Because
Yeah.
the other thing, just quickly, about the confusion, which is kind of sort of sums it up to one degree, when you know, you go into, I don't know what it's like in Indonesia, but when you go to a classroom, primary school classroom over here, invariably you'll find on each of the four walls will be four different
Right.
topics.
Right.
Or, you know, half of one wall has Henry VIII, the other half has lighthouses, another half
Quadratic equations on the back wall. Yeah.
yeah, and it's all there,
Yeah.
and all their works there, which is great. It's great, but when you go in there, you look in, you're confused,
Yeah.
just by default, because you're like,
Yeah.
well, this is my classroom, but what does it stand for? Okay, you
Yeah.
might say it stands for showcasing all the stuff that we've looked at and
Yeah.
showcasing all the work, which is good. But where is that tangibility? Where is that thing where
And as you say, just
good
the
half of them,
connection, right? Just
yeah,
the connection from one thing to another. It would be all right if they're different subjects, but there's some relation, there's some theme that runs through them, but there usually isn't. You know, meanwhile, you know, on the other hand, on the other side of the coin, if you go into an artist's studio or you go into a mechanic's workshop, or you know, and you go into a doctor's laboratory or whatever, you know, they are just surrounded in an environment where everything they're surrounded by is related to the task that they're focused on at the moment.
that's right.
Whereas when you
Yeah.
go into the classroom, you know, in the worst cases, and as you know, not every school is like this,
No,
but most are, and certainly in the worst cases, you go into the classroom and there's nothing about their environment that
yeah,
represents the task they're supposed to be focused on right now. So they're just surrounded by distractions. You know,
yeah.
they're in a room that is almost, if you now said to me, Carl, I want you to design a room that will maximize distractions so that the kids can't focus on what they're supposed to be learning, that's what I'd design. I'd say, okay, let's build a room where the four walls are telling them four different things about four different subjects, all the colors of the rainbow. That's the room you would design to prevent learning, not to support learning. So it's confusion. It's like a room built for confusion.
Yeah. So, you know, and that's one thing that I want to do. You know, we're currently sort of putting the website together for Educate First. I don't know, is this like a shameless plug or something? Can I?
Oh yeah,
can
go ahead. It's your show.
So you know, that's what. So we've got the website under construction at the minute, but at Educate First, that's basically what we want to do. You know, we want to create environments where when a young person steps into the room, they know exactly why they're there.
Right.
They know exactly what is to come, and there's no confusion, basically. So if it's computer science, everything on the walls, everything in the room is just related to that. So there's no, I don't know, is it this, is that? It's nothing like that.
Yeah.
Because I see it as important. And I think, you know, with everything that we're going to be discussing in the coming weeks, you know, I think it's important for the listeners and the people that are watching to know that we're not just here on a soapbox speaker's corner kind of thing, you know,
Yeah.
just on a rant. You know, we're actually looking to sort of implement solutions as well, because I think that's the
exactly right.
important thing. Because we got kids coming up that are like 8, 9, 10 now, and they've already gone. They've the boat's gone for them, really. So, you know, we have to be looking at those that are like, you know, 5, 6, and 7, if not younger. Them into that, to get them into that space where they're like, okay, I know why I'm doing this. I'm really interested. Oh, I don't really like English anymore. No problem. What do you want to do? Do you want to do math? No, I don't really. Okay, we'll find you something else. And what we want to do is have centres that specialise in many different things, and not just one building. It might be where you have one building that's big enough to help facilitate, you know, multiple things, but it won't be like you have to do everything.
Sure.
It will be a thing where, you know, for me, maybe I'm a bit old school, but I believe that, you know, knowing like maths, English, and computer science, I think those are like the basics that you need, especially nowadays, how things are going technology-wise. So everybody would do that in the first part of the day, sort of the first 3 hours or so. But after that, go and do your thing. You know, if it's art, like I said, art is art. Art is whatever your interpretation is.
Right.
You know, Monet and those guys, like, they were great at what they do, but the kids that I grew up with, like, most of them were not interested in doing, or they didn't really, they saw that as art, but not, like I said, it didn't mean anything to them. So
I mean, I don't know how much time you see in art classrooms in most mainstream schools, how much time they spend on things like manga and comic books. You know, that's the kind of thing, that's art, but for some reason it doesn't get put in the category, right?
No, it's not, because obviously it's not in the curriculum, and it's not what's wanted. But you know, art is not even only just drawing and painting.
No, absolutely right. Yeah, bang on.
You know, art is poetry. To some degrees, you know, so there's lots of different interpretations. So what we want to do at Educate First is, you know, help develop, you know, centers like that, where we may have one that deals with art, you know, art and construction and, you know, technology and all those things. And it might just be just those two things that go on in that place. But at least, you know, parents first and foremost, and children, know there's somewhere that I can go, that I can study what I want to, and I could actually do that all day, every day. Because that's the thing. Like you said, with the thing about the bells, that kind of that's that conditioning. Because even Gatto said in another one of the lessons where you don't really buy into anything.
Right.
Because you know that the bells come in and I've got to drop what I'm doing and I've got to move on. So
no, exactly right. I'm keen to see, as we continue with this podcast, you know, more developments for Educate First and how some of these things are being applied. And I think for the next few weeks we're going to be focused on this this speech from John Taylor Gatto, right?
Yeah.
So today was what he called lesson 1, right? Confusion. What's lesson 2? And that'll give people an idea of what we'll talk about next week.
Oh, mate, I'm not even prepared for that one.
I didn't cue you up for that one.
You got me on a hot, man. Lesson 2. Oh, let me scroll down. Hold on, I missed it. Lesson 2 is class position.
Okay. So I guess next week we'll talk about that, and it'll give people something to look forward to. And we'll see as well how that ties in with some of the work you're doing, some of the work I'm doing. And also, I actually, if I can take a minute to just let people know as well, this podcast comes after you've just appeared on the Rebel Teacher podcast as well. So if anybody hasn't seen that yet, they can head there. It'll be on the same YouTube channel. They're all together. People can see you and me talking there about some, you know, looser subjects around education reform. And I'll be with you again next week to talk more about class position.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining me on the first one, Carl. And everyone else, you can, if you like and subscribe to this, Press the notification bell, and we will catch you next week.
Yes, we will.
Goodbye.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.